Okay, picture this. It's Wednesday, April 16th, 2025. You're somewhere near the University of Hyderabad.
Right.
And it's supposed to be, normal campus sounds, maybe some birds, but instead, chainsaws.
Yeah, a really jarring sound in that context.
Especially right next door in Kancha Gachibowli. This really vital patch of green. It sounds like something out of a bad movie, honestly.
It really does. And Kancha Gachibowli, it wasn't just like a few trees here and there. It was a proper ecosystem, giving oxygen, much needed shade. Hyderabad gets hot, and it was a home for wildlife. So those chainsaws, they were doing more than just cutting timber.
They were literally dismantling a habitat.
Yeah.
And the scale of it is, well, staggering.
400 acres.
400 acres. The Telangana government was eyeing this huge plot right up against the university. And their approach seemed to be, well, let's just say, clear first, ask questions later.
It certainly looked that way. Kind of a cut now, plan the development, maybe sometime down the line approach, which is unusual.
Unusual is putting it mildly. But then, things took a really sharp turn. The Supreme Court got involved.
And not in a small way. They stepped in quite decisively.
Yeah, it became this real flashpoint, rapid development plans crashing headlong into environmental concerns.
And the court basically hit the pause button saying, wait a minute, what's actually happening here?
Exactly. And that's what we're getting into today. We're going to unpack this whole situation, the trees, the wildlife, the government's rush, the student protests.
And that really powerful response from the judiciary. It's a story with, frankly, quite a few layers.
So let's dig into Kancha Gachibowli itself a bit more. It wasn't just land waiting to be built on.
No, not at all. Think of it as a functioning natural community. Plants, animals, all interdependent. A green lung, really, for that part of Hyderabad.
Essential for air quality, right.
Absolutely. And for the creatures living there, birds, mammals, it was everything. Food, shelter, their entire world.
So imagine that just being erased. The government called it development, but the way they went about it.
Well, the Supreme Court definitely raised an eyebrow at that term, didn't they?
They did. It leads us to how the court got involved in the first place. April 3rd, they took suo motu cognizance.
Which is pretty significant. It means the court acted on its own initiative. They saw the reports, perhaps the videos.
The student activism.
Exactly. And decided it was serious enough to step in without waiting for a formal petition.
And their first question was basically, why the tearing hurry?
That phrase really captures the court's skepticism. They wanted to know why this had to happen so fast.
Was there some emergency? Apparently not one the state government could convincingly explain at that point.
It suggested, maybe the justifications weren't quite robust enough for the scale of the action.
Which takes us to that really crucial hearing on Wednesday, April 16th.
Right. Justices Gavai and Masih were presiding. And they really grilled the Telangana representative, Abhishek Singhvi.
It sounds like it was quite intense. They weren't just asking hypotheticals.
No, they were demanding concrete answers. And significantly, they didn't just focus on stopping more trees from being cut.
That's key, isn't it? They looked at the damage already done.
Precisely. About 100 acres were already affected, apparently. And the court demanded a restoration plan for that area.
Wow. Okay, so not just stop cutting, but tell us how you're going to fix what you've already broken.
Exactly. It shows they understand that ecological damage isn't just easily reversible. You can't just, stick trees back in the ground and call it a day.
It's a complex system.
It is. And then came the explicit order. Not a single tree will be felled there. Full stop. Until the next hearing, May 15th.
That's a very clear line drawn in the sand. It really puts the brakes on things.
It does. It demonstrates the court acting as a powerful check when environmental issues are potentially being sidelined.
And then the impact goes way beyond just the trees, as you said earlier.
Yeah.
The ecosystem aspect is huge.
Absolutely. We heard reports of animals literally running for shelter when the felling started.
That's just awful to imagine. The immediate chaos for wildlife.
Total displacement, loss of food sources, loss of nests, burrows. It's devastating on that immediate level.
And then there are the longer-term things, the air quality, climate regulation for the local area. These trees were doing important work.
Which the Supreme Court seemed to explicitly acknowledge. They mentioned going out of the way to protect the environment and ecology. That's strong language.
It signals a real commitment, doesn't it?
Yeah.
A recognition of the intrinsic value of these natural spaces.
It does. And we absolutely have to talk about the students here.
Yes, the University of Hyderabad students. They weren't just watching this happen.
No, they were actively protesting, raising the alarm. Their activism seems to have been crucial.
Making noise, getting the word out, maybe sharing those videos that likely caught the court's attention.
It seems very likely. It's a fantastic example of how citizen action, grassroots mobilization can actually make a difference.
It really is. Students fighting for their immediate environment, their campus backyard, essentially.
And their actions resonated all the way up to the highest court. It shows that people standing up can influence things.
So, back to the government's tearing hurry. The court just wasn't buying the justification.
That seems to be the crux of it. The urgency wasn't adequately explained, at least not to the court's satisfaction initially.
Which raises, broader questions about transparency, doesn't it? When large projects impact the environment so drastically.
Definitely. And the demand for that restoration plan now, it really drives home the point that development can't just ignore the ecological consequences.
Because fixing it is hard. You can't just replant a 100-acre forest easily.
Not even close. It takes years, decades, careful management, assuming you can even replicate the original biodiversity and soil health. The court demanding a plan shows they grasped that complexity.
So zooming out a bit, this specific case in Hyderabad, it's kind of a microcosm, isn't it?
It really is. This tension development pushing against environmental limits, we see this everywhere. India, globally.
Infrastructure projects, mining, urban sprawl. It's the same fundamental conflict playing out in different ways.
And the Supreme Court stepping in like this, it highlights the vital role the judiciary can play as a safeguard.
A check on potentially unsustainable development pathways.
Exactly. Ensuring that environmental laws and principles aren't just, suggestions, but have real teeth.
And thinking about the students again, it's also a human story. People connected to a place, fighting for it.
It's about accountability, too. Holding authorities responsible for decisions that affect the environment we all depend on. It's a lesson in civic engagement, really.
So where do things stand right now? The felling has stopped.
Yes, completely halted by the Supreme Court's order. The next key date is May 15th for the hearing.
And that hearing will be critical. What happens next for this land, for the restoration plan?
A lot hangs in the balance. The court will examine the state's plan, their justifications. The outcome could set a precedent.
And in the meantime, what about the wildlife still there?
The court did address that. They've tasked the wildlife warden with protecting the animals in the remaining forest area during this interim period.
Okay, so some immediate protection measures are in place.
Yes, a necessary stopgap. But their long-term safety obviously depends on whether their habitat is ultimately preserved or restored.
It just makes you stop and think, doesn't it? What does development actually mean?
That's the big question this case throws into sharp relief.
Is it just about concrete and roads? Or does it have to include, ecological health, clean air, biodiversity?
And are the economic arguments always enough to justify irreversible environmental costs? It's something we all need to grapple with far beyond Hyderabad.
Definitely food for thought for everyone listening. So just to recap our deep dive here.
We've seen the Supreme Court step in forcefully to stop tree felling near Hyderabad University.
We've talked about why that forest, Kancha Gachibowli, is so ecologically important.
We highlighted the crucial role of student activism in bringing the issue to light.
And we've placed it in that wider context of the ongoing struggle between development and environmental protection. Our goal, as always, is just to offer some clarity on these complex events.
And this case really shows how environment, law, and community action are all tangled together. Local issues can have national significance.
Absolutely. So while the final chapter isn't written yet, keep an eye on that May 15th hearing. We hope this deep dive gives you the context to understand what's at stake.
And maybe prompts some thinking about how that balance between progress and preservation plays out where you live.
Because getting to grips with these stories, these conflicts, well, that's your shortcut to being informed. And sometimes the most surprising insights come from these very clashes.